The private heliport baked under the midday sun. The helicopter, the Valkyrie, sat dead center. Billionaire CEO Serena Vane stood, arms crossed, her heels hammering the concrete. The lead engineer, Thompson, shook his head. Not flyable, Ms. Vane. $1 billion meeting was minutes late. Every second cost millions. In the hangar's darkest corner, Daniel, the janitor, paused, wiping leaked oil. Vane spotted him, her expression a sneer of contempt. You? The one who sweeps up their mess? She pointed at the cockpit. If you're so brave, fly it. Cynical laughter swept the anxious engineers. Daniel Reeves slowly lifted his head. The entire heliport fell instantly silent. Daniel Reeves was the necessary ghost of Vane Aviation's gleaming private terminal. He handled everything the high-salaried staff deemed too mundane or dirty. His official title, L1 Facilities and Auxiliary Maintenance, was a corporate euphemism for the janitor. He earned an hourly wage that barely kept pace with the rising cost of childcare for his daughter Sarah. He was the lowest rung, explicitly forbidden from touching any flight-critical equipment, let alone the complex bespoke cockpit of the CEO's custom-built $35 million corporate transport, the Valkyrie. This invisibility was Daniel's shield, a deliberately crafted consequence of a trauma he refused to revisit. He was a single father, a man whose entire existence outside of work revolved around the rigid, non-negotiable 4 p.m. school pickup. Sarah was his anchor, the reason he needed stillness, silence, and routine. For years before, he had been Major Daniel Maverick Reeves, a decorated military test pilot and one of the most brilliant flight engineers the Air Force had ever seen. He specialized in pushing prototype aircraft, drones, vertical lifters, and stealth bombers, to the edge of the envelope and bringing them back intact. His expertise lay not just in flying, but in the intuitive mechanics of failure. He could anticipate a break before the system registered a tremor. His legendary career ended abruptly 5 years prior during the final test phase of a new, long-range reconnaissance drone. The military brass, pressured by political deadlines, demanded a software bypass. This hack would artificially boost the drone's flight time in official demonstrations, a shortcut that Daniel knew compromised the essential fail-safe safety parameters. It created an unpredictable, latent instability, a digital time bomb, as Daniel labeled it. When ordered to sign off on the change, he refused, citing the high probability of collateral damage in a real-world scenario. His superiors chose the political win over genuine safety. Daniel made the toughest decision of his life. He walked away from a legendary, high-status career, a 7-figure salary potential, and the prestige that came with it. He chose conscience over command and safety over status. He traded the deafening, adrenaline-fueled roar of jet engines for the quiet, predictable scrape of a mop on concrete. This job was the perfect cloak. Low pay, zero responsibility outside of manual labor, and most crucially, the 4 p.m. clock-out guarantee. Serena Vane, the billionaire CEO, operated by an entirely different creed. She saw time as a weapon and people as disposable levers in her pursuit of exponential growth. She was a force of nature, ruthless, brilliant, and accustomed to instantaneous obedience. To her, everything had a price, and anyone who accepted a station as low as janitor did so because they lacked the necessary ambition or the courage to win. She judged people based on their title and their impact on her bottom line, not their intrinsic value. Her helicopter, the Valkyrie, was currently crippled by a subtle intermittent control fault. The fault was not catastrophic. It wouldn't cause an immediate crash, but it was irregular and unpredictable, making takeoff legally and morally impossible for the engineers. The highly paid certified team of aviation engineers, led by the stressed Thompson, had spent 2 hours running frantic diagnostics. They were paralyzed, not by the technical fault, but by the overwhelming legal responsibility. Signing off on a dangerous fault for the CEO was a career-ending, company-killing liability. They all refused to declare the aircraft airworthy, hiding behind their digital readouts. Daniel had been observing the escalating drama from his vantage point near the service entrance. He didn't speak. He didn't offer advice. He simply listened, a deep, professional habit. Unlike the engineers who stared at the flashing, high-tech error codes on their tablets, Daniel listened with his entire being. He was tuned to the subtle mechanical frequencies, the unusual cadence of the hydraulic pump cycling, the high-pitched, almost imperceptible whine of the auxiliary power unit, and the faint asymmetrical scrape of the main rotor bearing when the strong midday wind shifted. He still operated by the principle he developed years ago in the military proving grounds. The physical machine will always reveal its truth through sound and feel, before the digital display reveals its lie through code. The engineers were relying on the code, which was designed to filter out the noise. Daniel was listening to the unadulterated heartbeat of the machine. He knew exactly what the mechanical problem was and how the computer was misinterpreting it. But nobody, least of all the frantic, title-obsessed staff, had asked the janitor's opinion. The silence from the engineers was expensive. Every minute the Valkyrie remained grounded, Serena Vane's chances of arriving at the Shanghai merger meeting on time plummeted. She was staring at a 10-minute window to make her scheduled takeoff, or she would lose a controlling, unrecoverable vote on the acquisition that was set to expand her company by 50%. The merger represented the culmination of 3 years of brutal, non-stop work. She turned on the technical team, her voice a whip crack that echoed across the vast hangar space, amplified by the sheer volume of her frustration. 2 hours! 2 hours of staring at a screen that screams, error. Your collective salaries could buy a small island. Are you experts or children playing with expensive toys? Give me a timeline or give me a solution. The engineers shrank back, their faces pale beneath the fluorescent lights. Thompson, the lead engineer, was physically shaking as he read a repeating loop of cryptic failure codes. Serena Vane desperately needed a release valve, a target to redistribute the immense pressure crushing her schedule and ego. Her gaze swept past the terrified engineers, landing with cold, surgical precision on Daniel. He was standing near a stack of freshly laundered rags, his mop handle resting neatly against the wall, a picture of infuriating calm amidst the corporate chaos. "Ah, Daniel," she announced to the room, her voice dripping with corrosive, public irony. The engineers instantly straightened up, relieved the focus was suddenly off their catastrophic failure. At least he knows how to clean properly. That seems to be the only reliable skill set we have today in this overpaid circus. A young, ambitious junior engineer, eager to score points with the CEO, let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh designed to underscore Vane's contempt. The sound was thin, ugly, and instantly regretted as Serena's gaze briefly flickered his way. Serena Vane walked deliberately toward Daniel, her polished shoes clicking a menacing, relentless rhythm on the concrete floor. She stopped less than 2 feet from him, forcing him to look up from the floor. Her anger was now purely personal, directed at the quiet, low-status man who represented everything her corporate world deemed irrelevant. A person who prioritized peace over profit. She spoke slowly, articulating every syllable, making the challenge clear and undeniable for everyone present. "You know what, Daniel? You have the perfect view of this failure. You're always here, watching us, watching the chaos." She gestured grandly toward the helicopter, her hand trembling slightly with fury. "We are talking about billions of dollars, Daniel. We are talking about power and progress. And these experts can't get me 5,000 feet in the air. So, I will give you a chance to be useful." She delivered the final, cruel ultimatum, leaning in so her voice dropped to a dangerous, intimate whisper, meant only for him. "Fly it. Just get it airborne. Solve the problem that these highly educated, certified men cannot. And if you refuse this one, simple request, then you can go back to mopping up the mess you belong with, and you will find your cleaning contract terminated by the end of the day." The air thickened with dread. The engineers who had laughed a moment ago now stood completely paralyzed. They recognized the challenge was no longer a joke, but a bizarre, desperate, and potentially dangerous stunt designed to break the janitor's composure and provide Serena an outlet for her immense failure anxiety. Every eye in the hangar, from the ground crew to the frightened engineering team, is locked on Daniel. They expected confusion, a nervous stammer, a quick, shame-faced retreat, or perhaps a desperate protest about his lack of certification. The challenge was designed to shatter him, to prove his insignificance in the face of billion-dollar power. Daniel did none of those things. He calmly took a deliberate step back from the stack of rags. He lowered the mop handle with a gentle thud, placing it neatly against the wall. His movements were slow, focused, and lacking in fear or subservience. He did not look at the CEO's expensive shoes, her angry face, or the terrified engineers. He looked only at the Valkyrie, his eyes moving over its frame with the detached, analytical gaze of a man reading a complex blueprint. He didn't defend his past, or explain his expertise, or acknowledge the insult, or even protest the threat to his job. He simply looked at Thompson, the lead engineer, who was still staring uselessly at his diagnostic pad, and then back at the CEO. He asked one quiet, single question, his voice clear, measured, and utterly devoid of emotion. Fuel load? The question was technical. It was specific. It was professional. It was the absolute first, most necessary query a pilot asks before assessing a flight condition. A critical, fundamental step the panicked, digitally focused engineers had entirely skipped, obsessed with the blinking fault codes. Daniel was asking about the mass of the machine, a variable no computer could ignore. The junior engineers' lingering laughter died, choked by the realization of their collective oversight. The entire roaring tension of the hangar shattered into abrupt, absolute silence. They had demanded a janitor's retreat. They received a major's flight engineer's query. The noise had been replaced by a single, unanswerable point of focus. Daniel waited patiently. He still had not moved towards the helicopter, maintaining the distance of a maintenance man waiting for authorization. Lead engineer Thompson, visibly sweating, stammered out the answer, holding his tablet like a shield. 85%, full internal tank plus emergency reserve. Thank you, Daniel replied, the simple courtesy cutting through the tension with the precision of a scalpel. He then addressed the CEO, his attention never wavering from the aircraft. Ms. Vane, the Valkyrie is your property. I require your explicit authorization for the cockpit door to be unlocked, and a liability waiver should I successfully prove its airworthiness. Thompson exploded, the panic finally overriding his professionalism. Absolutely not. The control system is unstable. We are not legally permitted to allow an unauthorized person, much less one lacking flight certification for this model, to... Serena Vane, however, was no longer in control of her rage. She was in control of her curiosity. The janitor's singular, focused question had completely arrested her anger and replaced it with a sharp, calculated risk assessment. She saw his absolute, unshakable confidence and wondered if she had miscalculated the man entirely. Thompson, stand down. I will not miss this merger. Daniel, she looked at him, her eyes hard. I'm your waiver. You have 3 minutes. If you so much as scratch the paint, the liability falls on your maintenance bond. She then pulled a magnetic key card from her pocket and with a subtle gesture of surrender, tossed it toward him. Daniel caught the card without effort, his hand movements precise. He walked, not with the hurried pace of a nervous trespasser, but with the measured, familiar authority of an aircraft commander, directly to the Valkyrie. Twist 1. The authority of knowledge. He climbed into the pilot's seat. The engineers were clustered around the landing gear, whispering in frantic, disbelieving huddles. Daniel ignored the main, state-of-the-art avionics array, which was lit up like a Christmas tree with angry, pulsing red warnings. He didn't waste valuable time booting the full system or navigating complex digital menus. Instead, he reached for a small, secondary, almost forgotten diagnostic panel mounted beneath the console. He checked 3 overlooked, non-digital, non-powered parameters requiring only tactile feedback: air oil separator pressure, hydraulic fluid temperature, and subtle deviation from ambient. And finally, he tested the subtle mechanical slack on the collective stick. It was this final check that revealed the absolute truth, confirming his earlier diagnosis based on sound. The flight computer was correctly reporting an intermittent control input error, but the error wasn't in the electronics or the software. Rotor torque sensor is misaligned by 4 degrees, Daniel stated calmly, his voice now audible over the intercom system he had just activated. It's a manufacturing tolerance issue that the central flight computer keeps compensating for, leading to the reported instability. The computer is chasing its own tail because the physical baseline is wrong. It's not a software glitch. It's a physical lie programmed to be ignored. Thompson stared at his diagnostic screen, his hands shaking violently as he cross-referenced Daniel's claim with the physical maintenance logs. He gasped. Daniel was right. The sensor calibration was indeed 4 degrees off, but the main system had been programmed to filter out that particular mechanical drift, assuming it was within acceptable limits for a non-critical system. Daniel had diagnosed a $35 million helicopter's crippling flight fault in 90 seconds by checking the physical controls, not the digital readouts. The realization hit Thompson with the force of a crash. Only the aircraft's original designer, or a dedicated military test pilot who understood the system's intended failure modes, would know to check that hidden tolerance. He scrambled for a physical reference log, pulling up the oldest, thickest binder. There, stamped on the original blackout protocol documentation for the Valkyrie's control system, was the name of the lead test engineer who signed off on the initial tolerance limits, Major D. Reeves. Daniel ignored their dawning terror and recognition. He reached down beneath the main instrument panel. He didn't use any external tool. He didn't need one. With a precise, practiced movement that only someone who had designed the machine would know, he made a tiny manual adjustment to a secondary calibration dial, a feature designed for immediate field repair by a test pilot, hidden deep beneath the fascia. He was speaking to the machine in its native tongue, mechanics. He took a deep breath, centered himself, and prepared for lift. The rotors, which had been silent, began their ritualistic spin, gaining speed with a deep, resonant thrum. He flipped the safety switch and initiated startup, but only in manual override safety mode, bypassing the flight computer's chaotic inputs entirely. The engine caught. The vibration was smooth, perfect, a purring testament to his skill. Daniel gently eased the collective lever upwards. With a subtle, perfect lift, the Valkyrie rose 1 inch off the ground. He maintained the hover, flawless and rock-steady, defying the panic-inducing error codes that still flashed on the primary screen. He was flying the machine, not the computer. The entire heliport, the engineers, the security detail, and Serena Vane herself froze solid. The helicopter, which was not flyable moments ago, was now flying with a serene, absolute grace that none of them could believe. Twist 2, the authority of stillness. Daniel did not fly a celebratory lap, nor did he gain altitude. He simply maintained the 1-inch hover for 30 seconds, proving absolute, undeniable control over the machine, while the entire hangar held its collective breath. He made it clear this was not about ego, but competency. Then, with the same effortless, military-grade precision, he lowered the Valkyrie back onto its designated spot. It landed perfectly, the skids settling with an almost imperceptible puff of dust. He shut down the rotors. The great spinning blades slowed, their perfect, steady rhythm confirming the stability of the machine and the correctness of his diagnosis. He removed his headset, the sound of the resulting silence rushing back in to fill the enormous hangar. He turned in the seat, facing the stunned audience. The powerful billionaire and her team of experts were staring at him with a mixture of awe, disbelief, and a terrifying shame. Daniel spoke one sentence, his voice echoing in the dead silence, his final decisive critique of the entire organization's obsession with speed and technology over fundamental mechanics. It wasn't broken. He paused, allowing the weight of the moment to settle, his eyes sweeping over the team of useless, hyper-focused engineers. You were rushing it, and you forgot how to listen to the machine. Serena Vane remained standing motionless, a solitary statue of stunned authority. The intense heat from the midday sun seemed to have vanished, replaced by a cold, heavy, profound silence. She was not angry anymore. She was utterly stunned. Her team of high-priced engineers scrambled frantically, silently checking their data. Thompson, the lead engineer, was now crouched down, frantically opening the exact panel Daniel had worked on, confirming the calibration shift. His voice, barely audible, crackled over the emergency maintenance channel to his deputy. He's right. The 4 degrees, coupled with the pressure to hit the merger deadline, we ignored the 3 secondary checks. We assumed the error was electrical because we prioritized the digital readout over the fundamental mechanical stability. The mistake was catastrophic, one of human impatience, corporate pressure, and arrogant reliance on technology that filtered out the essential truth. No one dared to laugh now. The hangar, minutes ago a scene of frantic noise and shouting, was now held in a profound, terrifying quiet. The noise of power had been defeated irreversibly by the stillness of competence. Serena Vane slowly raised her hands to her face and took off her expensive mirrored sunglasses. It was the first time her eyes were fully visible in the harsh light. The engineers watching her saw not the familiar cold fury, but a shocking flicker of naked vulnerability, and perhaps dawning terror. She walked slowly toward the helicopter, stopping beside the landing skid. She looked up at Daniel, who was calmly unbuckling the safety harness. He was once again the janitor, but the aura of a military commander now clung to him. She had spent her life issuing commands, demanding, and enforcing. But now she found herself asking a question, a genuine query devoid of any authority. Who are you, truly? Daniel finally stepped out of the helicopter, placing his feet back on the concrete. He was exactly where he had started, near the maintenance cart. He met her gaze, his own eyes quiet and steady. He did not answer with his military rank, or his past credentials, or his former status. He answered with the philosophy he now lived by, a critique of her entire corporate ethos. Someone who waits until it's safe, Ms. Vane. That was all. He hadn't just fixed the Valkyrie. He had exposed the core systemic flaw of her empire, the obsession with speed, efficiency, and metrics over fundamental, unhurried stability. He had traded his career for silence, and in that silence he found absolute, undeniable power. Serena Vane stood there for another minute, processing the implication. She looked at the frantic engineers, then at the perfect still helicopter, and finally back at Daniel. She understood that she was staring at the last living remnant of the conscience she had long since traded for power. She turned to the engineers. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was low, measured, and profoundly changed. It was no longer a whip crack, but a controlled, surgical incision. Thompson, you and your team will immediately implement a 2-day stand down. You are to write a full report, not on the technical failure, but on the human failure that caused you to ignore the fundamental checks. Your focus was on the deadline, not the data. We will use this incident to fundamentally rewrite every operational procedure in this hangar. Thompson nodded, his head bowed in complete professional shame. Serena looked at the young engineer who had laughed at Daniel. You will personally assist Daniel in cleaning this hangar for the next month. You will learn what it is to be overlooked, and you will learn that every aspect of the machine, from the fuel load to the smallest piece of detritus on the floor, is part of the system's integrity. The young man merely whispered, "Yes, Ms. Vane." The arrogance completely burned out of him. The balance of power had shifted completely. The woman who defined worth by status was now standing in awe of the man who defined worth by integrity. Daniel was now the highest moral authority in the room, and Serena Vane finally understood the true weight of risk. She realized that Daniel's stillness was not a lack of ambition, but the highest form of discipline. The next day, Daniel was summoned to Serena Vane's sleek, minimalist office suite, which now seemed almost too vast, too noisy for a serious discussion. The atmosphere was businesslike, but respectful. The icy contempt was completely gone, replaced by a formidable deference. Serena Vane laid out a contract on her desk. "Daniel, the board has unanimously approved a new position for you, Chief Flight Integrity Officer. You will be my private pilot, flight engineer, and sole authority over the airworthiness of the Valkyrie and all future Vane Aviation craft. The salary is 7 figures, plus guaranteed performance equity. It is the prestige, the authority, and the wealth you should have always commanded." It was everything he had walked away from years ago, enough to secure his daughter's future 10 times over, enough to buy a dozen homes near her school. Daniel picked up the pen, held it for a moment, and then gently lowered it. He slid the contract back across the desk. I appreciate the extraordinary offer, Ms. Vane, but I must respectfully decline the title and the position. Serena Vane frowned, not in anger, but in confusion that quickly deepened into frustration. Why? You proved yesterday that you are the only one capable of ensuring my safety, and therefore the safety of this company's future. Why are you refusing the only mechanism that allows you to enforce the standard you demand? Exactly, Daniel replied, his voice calm. I saved your flight because I am an outsider. The moment I accept the title, I become a component of the noise. I will be accountable to the internal politics, the budget cuts, and the inevitable pressure to shave a few minutes off the checklist for the next billion-dollar merger. My integrity becomes compromised by your system's expediency. I lose the necessary distance. He offered his definitive counterproposal. I will accept a continuous, external, sole source maintenance and oversight contract. My fee can be negotiated, but my working hours must be strictly flexible, allowing me to meet my domestic obligations without question. But I have one non-negotiable term that must be formalized by your legal team and enforced by your security detail. Name it, she said instantly, recognizing that she was dealing not with an employee, but a necessary failsafe. Every single flight, regardless of urgency, must be preceded by a mandatory, comprehensive pre-flight checklist. This checklist must be manually signed by the pilot, the engineer, and myself as an external authority before the CEO can even approach the aircraft. Any deviation, any attempt to rush the process will result in an immediate flight cancellation without penalty to me, my team, or the flight crew. The ultimate safety authority must reside outside the corporate schedule. This is non-negotiable. Hakim, he was demanding a legislative shield to protect the principle of stillness, effectively making himself the company's external, untouchable conscience. The clause was approved instantly. The engineers, humbled by the near disaster, meticulously updated every single pre-flight checklist to include Daniel's new, non-negotiable inspection points, dubbed the Reeves Protocol. 2 weeks later, the protocol was tested. Serena Vane, running late for a crucial government lobby meeting, attempted to board the Valkyrie before Daniel had completed his final walk-around. She found the hangar door sealed. Her pilot, now rigid with adherence to the new protocol, stopped her with a curt, "Ms. Vane, the external authority has not completed the check. The Reeves Protocol dictates we wait." Serena Vane, remembering the cold silence of the hangar, did not argue. She merely offered a quiet, "Understood. Wait." The incident became corporate legend. Later that afternoon, the Valkyrie was finally prepped for flight. Serena Vane boarded last, pausing at the cockpit door. She looked back at Daniel, who was standing on the tarmac, his clipboard in hand, his work finished. She did not speak a command or offer a reward. She simply offered him a slow, deferential nod, the only acknowledgement he needed. Daniel nodded in return. He watched the massive aircraft lift flawlessly into the sky. Once it was gone, he picked up the mop he had left leaning against the wall, ready to clean the hangar for his 4:00 p.m. departure. He was still the maintenance man, but no one on that heliport, from the lead engineer to the security guard, ever dared to call him the janitor again. His name had become synonymous with integrity, safety, and the absolute incorruptible power found only in the silence of truth. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, leave a comment and subscribe to TT Healing Tales. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten.